Hello and welcome to the January 24th meeting of the Thurston Regional Housing Council. I'm Carolyn Cox, Lacey's representative to the Housing Council. We have two new members of our council, so I think we probably want to do a room full introduction of everybody. Why don't we start with one of our new members here. Trevor, can you tell us who you are and what you're about?
Sounds good. I'm Trevor Palmer, Yelm City Council. So this is one of my first new committees that I've had a pleasure of being part of. So looking forward to working with y'all.
Great. Can we just keep going? Rich?
Sure. Rich Hoy, City of Olympia, Assistant City Manager.
Darian Lightfoot, City of Olympia, Director of Housing and Homeless Response.
Tom Webster, Thurston County Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention Program Manager.
Carolina Mejia, Thurston County Commissioner and alternate.
Elisa Sparkman, I'm the Communication Specialist for the Regional Housing Council and the Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention at Thurston County.
Okay. Well, we let Robin. Sure. Robin, can you just introduce yourself quickly? We're just doing that.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Robin Campbell. I'm the interim county manager. And welcome to our building.
I'm Keely Marinell. I am the Thurston County Homeless Response Program Manager.
Alex First, I'm the Thurston County Housing Program Manager.
And Jacinda Stelcha, City of Olympia Affordable Housing Program Manager.
Jennifer Adams, City of Lacey Housing Coordinator.
Ryan Andrews, Planning Manager with the City of Lacey.
Danny Madrone, representative from the Olympia City Council.
Okay, and on screen, Michael?
Hi, Michael Althauser, Tumwater City Council. I'm our representative on the council.
Thank you. Brad?
Brad Medard, Planning Manager, City of Tumwater.
Caven?
Good morning or afternoon. Caven Hill, Vice Chair of the Homeless Services Advisory Board.
Okay, Tammy?
Tammy Smith, and I'm the Chair of the Homeless Services Advisory Board.
Thank you. Talana?
Talana Reed, the Chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board.
And Gary?
I'm Gary Cooper, Planning and Building Manager, City of Yelm.
Great. Joan?
Joan Cathy, City of Tumwater.
Thank you. And Robert?
Lipia, City of Olympia,
Alternate. Okay, so several new faces. And Emily?
Hey everyone, it's Emily Klaus, Thurston County Commissioner for District 5, new member of RHC, and I'm super excited to be here. I'm homesick today, so I won't be on screen, but I look forward to being there in person next time.
Thanks, Emily. And Leah?
Hi.
Okay. I'm seeing you on screen.
Yeah.
All right. And we have the inimitable Linda Zeman over here. Welcome. Thank you. All right. Has everybody had a chance to review the agenda? And anybody want to request any changes? Ask any questions?
Or move to approve?
Or move to approve?
So moved.
Okay. Do I hear a second? I'll second it. Any comments? Hearing none, all in favor of approving our agenda for today, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Next is approval of the minutes from our December 13th meeting. Can I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second.
All right, we've got the Danny Michael duo going on that. Any comments on the minutes? Okay, well, I just want to say I appreciate the quality of the minutes. I thought they were well done. All in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motions are approved. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment?
We did not have anyone signed up, but I don't know, Leah, if you can go to the attendee list, if there's anyone attendee who wants to make public comment, they could raise their hand. there's no public comment.
Okay. Great. Okay, so the next item on our agenda is, well, let me just background this a little bit. Our ILA, interlocal agreement among the jurisdictions here, establishes that the county representative will hold one of the two executive offices, and the other one has to be filled by a representative of the cities. Since I'm the Lacey rep currently as the chair, then the vice chair will fall to the county. So we need a motion to affirm Emily Klaus as a member and as our new vice chair. Anybody have any questions or concerns about that?
I have a question. Do we need to affirm her as a member or just as the vice chair?
I think we ought to do both just to make sure.
Oh, okay.
I think we can do it in one motion, but I think that way there's no question. Since she's coming in for her first meeting and landing an executive officer's position, and that's my reasoning for it.
Okay.
So
I move that we approve Commissioner Klaus as a member of the RHC and as vice chair of the RHC.
Okay.
I'll second.
Okay. So motion by Danny, seconded by Michael. Any questions, comments? Right. All in favor of affirming Emily as our new county rep and vice chair, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, congratulations or commiserations, whichever is most appropriate, Emily.
Thank
All right.
you. I was looking for the reaction button so I could celebrate with you all, but all I have is raised hand, so I'm cheering from behind the screen though.
That's okay. So Emily did attend her first meeting of the executive committee, so she dipped a toe in so far. So she's not totally cold on this yet. Okay, next up is the 2024 request for proposals and requests for information. That looks like Jacinda and Keely on that one.
Is there a second part here?
Oh, there is. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Scheduling the election for the chair and vice chair. I'm recommending to this body that we delay our election until our March meeting because we have two brand new members in Trevor and Emily. And I think in fairness to them, they need to get a chance to know us so they can make a reasoned decision in voting for officers. So if the rest of the body is good with that, then we'll put the election on our March meeting schedule. Everybody cool with that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Thanks for catching that, Danny. All righty, and now moving on to Jacinda and Keely on the 2024 RFPs and RFIs.
Go ahead.
You have the.
I have the first page, so, and this whole week, I'm like, oh yeah, Tom's doing that part. Surprise, I forgot. All right. So this year for our consolidated request for proposals, and the priorities for our request for proposals, RFP, we are only entertaining competitive applications for the cold and hazardous weather, as there are only single year contracts. And so our priorities are reflected in your packet to address and identify what cold weather shelter is and what hazardous weather shelter is. So in summary, the cold and hazardous weather contracts for shelter is for expanded shelter during the cold weather season, which is November 1 to the end of April. And then hazardous weather is when there is a response necessary because of the weather, be it heat or storms or snow or ice. And so that can look like shelter in place activities. It can also look like, which means going out into the encampments and making sure people who are sleeping outside have what they need to survive the night, and standing up pop-up shelters, cooling centers, and warming centers. So those will be the only applications we'll be reviewing this year. All the other contracts will be renewed, will be up for renewal, I should say. So below the priorities, we have the estimated revenues for our RFP in February. Our estimation, our estimation for this year's revenue for 2163, we believe will hold steady at 1.5 million. They'll be flat. We are getting a projection that our local home fund will be higher than it was last year. So we're projecting a local home fund is about 5.1 million, and 30% of those funds will be used for not capital, but for homeless services. Correct. It says capital there though. So subtotal this year, we're projecting 3,048,000 for these funds. So those are the 2163 local home fund, the most flexible funds that we have for homeless services. For basic needs, oh, this did not have the most recent. It is on the, it's on the back page. Okay, so for last year for the Human Services Fund, which is the local tax, we had $333,323 to distribute for basic needs. This year, you'll see on the back, it just wasn't copied over, we have $350,821. So that increase is it's not insignificant because it's an increase in revenue, which is great. The Homeless Services Advisory Board did meet and we discussed spreading that extra human services fund proportionate to the contracts that are up for renewal for that fund. So all contracts for basic needs from that fund source would just get an amendment to their existing budget reflecting proportionate amounts of the human services fund. H's, there's too many H's because there's like housing and homelessness and I never remember it's human. All right. On the next page, we have the 2163 set-asides for 2024, and these are proposed. So we have the cold and hazardous weather set-aside. Typically, it's 250,000 on an annual basis that we have set aside for those activities. Last year, when we awarded those contracts, we actually awarded above that at $265,800. We expect to do the same this year. The point in time count is annually $25,000 set aside for that activity. And then emergency funds, which we'll be hearing about later on tonight. Every year we do set aside $200,000 for emergency funds. And as of now, $0 of this fiscal year's emergency funds have been spent. Our 2-year set aside for other activities, so coordinated entry. This comes out of
Should we
the.
save questions for the end or ask questions as we are going?
I'm happy to take questions as we go.
Can I ask a question, Madam Chair? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So Keely, as of January 24, 0 from the emergency funds have been utilized. Is that because our fiscal year just started in January 24, or are we on the July calendar for fiscal years? Like, is it 0 because we literally just started, or are we mid-fiscal? I forget what fiscal year the county is on.
This is with the 2163 funds. They are a September 1 start date.
Okay, so we have like 9 months remaining in the year.
Correct.
In the fiscal year. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
And did we expend all of the funds for 2023, the emergency funds?
No.
No, all that was spent was for the OLIMAP, the fire, the camp fire, and that was around $114,000. So those remaining funds were unspent and they kind of roll back into the available funds for future RFPs.
Okay, thanks.
I've got a question as well. I'm just noticing that, we've got the same exact numbers for 2023 as we do for 2024. And it just makes me feel concerned around things like inflation, cost of living increases. And is that something that's been considered, and like, was it deliberate to keep them the same? Or is that something we should consider?
That's a good question. I'm gonna look to you.
These were 2163 funds, so we kept them the same because our revenue with the 2163, the document recording fee, we're projecting to be flat. As I think most people know, we took a big hit between 21, 22, and 23, not knowing what kind of interest rates are we gonna do this year. We're not projecting an increase in document recording fees yet, so that's why kind of those set asides come out of that 1.5 million. So because our funding is flat, we're projecting a flat, what we have available for next year.
Okay, I just get a little bit concerned about asking our partners, service providers to do the same amount of work, but with less resources because of the way that inflation eats away at things. And the general cost of getting things done, so I think it's something that we should consider. What happens with the leftover emergency funding that we didn't spend?
Generally, what happens is, because every other year we have a bigger RFP where we put in kind of all the fund sources, we look at our fund balance. And so probably for next year's RFP, we would look at what was available, what was unspent, and put that out for RFP. That's when we have a more robust RFP, because this year we're just looking at cold and hazardous weather, but there certainly would be an opportunity to increase that if this board desired to, kind of a modest amount, right? You could look at the emergency fund that was unspent from last year, and say you wanted to direct it this fund, we could do that.
Yeah, you mean like directed to help cover like inflation,
Yes.
like the cost of inflation? Yeah, that's what I was getting at there, but I just feel like we should be thinking about increased costs year by year as we consider these set asides. So if that's a potential source of being able to do that and still make the budget balance, then that would be ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. And noted. So the remaining set asides for 2023 are set in 2023 and reflected here in the column for 2024 are from different funding sources other than 2163. So our state dollars and our home fund. So with coordinated entry that in the past has been funded through either CHG or 2163, I think Consolidated Homeless Grant in the past. However, which we did at $250,000 in 2023, and then an additional $100,000 was allocated to the coordinated entry program from the HEN program, which is an eligible expense. So housing and essential needs. That was the request, and that was the decision was made. Yes, we will support you at $350,000. For housing basic needs, this is actually a 2163 set aside. So last year we funded the request at $270,963. We project doing the same this year, and just noting that the original set aside for a while has been $200,000. We increased that allocation last year for these 2 years. The Lived Experience Steering Committee, also funded through, I believe, 2163, is $50,000. We will renew that again in 2024. That $50,000 is contracted with an agency to facilitate that process and to facilitate also stipends being offered to those who are participating. Our advisory board stipends up to $25,000. So these are to be paid from the Olympia Home Fund revenue. And I didn't write that in. You can describe it if you'd like, Tom. And then in our 2023 consolidated RFP process, we had offered $5,000 set aside for 6 agencies if they would like to claim that $5,000 to do specifically DEI training or funds activities specifically to improve internal diversity, equity, and inclusion activities, hire a trainer, pay stipends, what have you. So we'll be repeating that also this year. And so our totals would be repeated here at $1,109,263 for our set asides in 2024. One thing to note is at the Homeless Services Advisory Board on the first page with our county home fund, that's $198,000 surplus above what we allocated last year. The Homeless Services Advisory Board voted to suggest that $198,000 being allocated to the Eviction Prevention Rent Assistance Program to amend those contracts because it's always at a deficit, and just putting it into those contracts to help EPRA stay afloat.
And we'll bring in kind of contract renewal requests to you probably in March. So we're not asking for any approval for renewal of contracts at this point. So today we're just asking to move forward with the RFP. We need to go to before the Board of County Commissioners to get authorization to issue that RFP. So the specific request is letting you know that we're requesting we're gonna RFP the homeless services, the cold weather and hazardous weather shelter funds.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, do I hear a
Yeah,
motion? Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Just to make sure I understand the terminology, we're talking about renewals, but also talking about RFPs. So the decision before us today is, are these amounts in the 2024 column going to be the amounts that are in the RFPs? And even if someone is seeking a renewal, they still have to apply to the RFP, correct?
No, so last year there were 2-year awards dependent, contingent on available funding and performance. So they do not need to reapply. So the only thing we're gonna be in the RFP is the $265,800 under that 2024 set aside. We don't RFP the point in time count or the emergency funds. So the RFP will just make available $265,800 unless there was a change to increase that amount. So that is what would be RFP that for the cold and hazardous weather contracts.
Okay, got it. Sorry, I think I was just confused between the status of that and the PIT and the emergency. That's helpful. Thanks.
So to be clear, what we're making a decision on today are just these numbers that are highlighted in orange.
Correct.
Okay. Well, and I'm curious what folks think about doing a slight increase on the 2024 cost for cold and hazardous weather, just to account for inflationary costs. I don't know if the county also needs that for the point in time count for the $25,000 amount, but I don't think it needs to be done for the emergency funds as well. So thoughts from folks?
Do you have a proposal where the whatever extra you're proposing is would come from?
I don't know, what was inflation at, like whatever the metric is that we, that we would use for, I don't know, the projects that our governments do, that like in terms of costs going up, so. Do we have a sense of?
Our projects in the county, the projects are what they cost. We don't include inflationary factors for them.
Okay. Well, I don't know what the inflation rate was at, but maybe I'm the only one who's concerned about this, but I just would, as the cost of living goes up, as the cost of purchasing things goes up, then the cost of doing this work goes up. So I don't know exactly what that metric is. Rich, I think you were raising your hand there.
Yeah, I think a reasonable number would be in the range of around 5%.
5%, yeah, that's what popped into my head, but I don't have anything to back it up.
Your Cox, I think there some has their hand raised.
Michael, and then Emily.
So to Danny's question, like the way that the RFP works is we have a set amount of money, and then the RFP will discuss the amount of services that money can provide. So it's not less that's going to the organization, but it's fewer people that could potentially be served due to a higher cost of service due to inflation. Is that an accurate understanding of what we're discussing?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Emily?
Yeah, so I was wondering, I know we said when it comes to the emergency funds, we didn't spend everything for the last set aside. Did we spend everything for cold and hazardous weather? I may have missed that, but I'm wondering if we had any left over at the end of last year.
I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me. Cold weather contracts generally spend out because that's kind of for the cold weather season, and so that's budgeted. So the cold weather contracts do spend out. The hazardous weather, I think we probably were close last year. I don't think they fully spent out, but probably close to spending out, right? We generally, those are in the $25,000 to $40,000 range. It just really depends on, kind of each year varies. So some years we spend that out and some years we don't. So it,
Okay, and then my follow-up question was, I see in the notes that it says the original set aside was 250,000. And I was wondering when that increase was made to 265,800, and what was the rationale behind that change when it happened initially?
So this happened this last year. It was a wild funding year where we were looking at a significant gap in being able to fund our system. And at the last minute, the Commerce had three extra pots of funding that came in at the 11th hour. And so instead of having $1 million+ deficit to what we had to allocate, we had what we needed and more. This is the first year we were able to fund many, many projects at full ask, which is, I think, in my lifetime here at the county has never happened before. And so this is based on the applications that came in for cold and hazardous weather. So this reflects, I think, almost every ask from agencies to provide services for cold weather received some funding, where that hasn't necessarily been true in the past. And I don't recall exactly the amounts that were awarded per contract, but I do believe that all asks were funded at some level.
Awesome, thanks, Keely.
Here, I've got a solution here for my concern. How about we leave it at the same amount? We never know how many cold days are gonna be, but we do have those emergency funds, and we make sure that the folks that are providing cold and hazardous weather services know that we would rather they ask for emergency funds rather than turn people away because they ran out of money. I'd be satisfied with that. But I do look, as I look at things like coordinated entry and other things where it's the same services provided year after year. I'd like to better understand the impacts on the organizations that are doing this work as their costs go up, but these dollar amounts remain the same, and kind of get ahead of that so we don't run into people being crunched trying to do the same amount of work with less resources. So how's that sound?
Yeah. I think that works.
Yeah.
So you're gonna make that in the form of a motion?
Carolyn, there's more.
I'm sorry. Emily? Is that a new hand?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that makes a lot of sense to me, because if there is an event where we need more funding for cold and hazardous, then I would assume that it would be as a result of the nature of an emergency. Because the thing that would make me nervous about just upping the base would be that we'd be doing it with one-time funds, which kind of calls into question sort of the future sustainability of doing that. So making it clear that we have an emergency funds account, I think makes a lot of sense, but I don't know if we need to do a motion for that, because it's just, if the motion is to just adopt this as it is, then I think we are set to proceed, but I might be wrong about that.
Yeah, I agree. Emily, is that a new hand up or?
No, it doesn't show my hand is up on my end. Let's see if I can make it go away. Did it go away?
I don't see you at all anymore, so. Okay, it went away now. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion
So
to,
we need a motion to approve the 1-year set asides as proposed. Is that correct?
yes.
So moved.
okay, thank you. Do I hear a second?
I'll
Second.
second.
Great, all right. We have a second by Trevor. Any more conversation on this? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Looks like we're good. All righty, thank you very much. And next up is Keely and Alex.
We have
Oh,
just.
I'm sorry.
Have more RFP.
Oh, you have more RFPs. Dang, okay.
Sorry, Carol. So Keely shared with you all
the numbers and priorities and scoring and such for the homeless services funding, 2163 funding. So I will be sharing with you the recommendations from the Thurston Affordable Housing Advisory Board concerning the RFP for the housing capital funds. So on page 7, page 7 summarizes all of our anticipated funding sources and amounts. So those include some federal sources such as the Home Fund, some one-time federal sources such as Home ARP, as well as some state resources, and then our combined Olympia and County Home Fund, which is also the 1/10 of 1% sales and use tax. So this will be our second RFP in which those home funds from the county and the Olympia have been combined. We're anticipating that in 2024, we'll have a total of just under 9 million available for housing capital. So that's great news. That's the most we've ever had. And then I will call attention to out of that 8,990,000 and some change. Alex will talk a little bit more about the Opportunity Fund, which is noted here, which will take out 20% of that, recommended taking out 20% of that amount. And again, Alex will speak more about what that proposal looks like. So approximately 7 million that will become available. The RFP goes out, just for everyone's knowledge, at the end of February. And what the Affordable Housing Advisory Board is recommending and what they've spent a significant amount of time the last few months talking about is any funding priorities, funding split. So how much percentage of the funds to what activities, and then the scoring criteria. So again, the RFP in 2024 is for projects that are needing funding in the next approximately 12 or so months. And the recommendation from the board is that for this year of that of that almost 9 million, that 20% be set aside for the Opportunity Fund, and the rest, about 7 million, be made available through the RFP, again, for capital projects. The board is also recommending not setting any funding priorities, which essentially means any project that would be eligible under any of these funding sources could apply. So those are projects such as multifamily and single family rental, multifamily, single family rehab or preservation, acquisition, and then the board is recommending accepting proposals for rental assistance just for 2024. They're also recommending not sending funding priorities, not just for types of projects, but population served. Although I will call everyone's attention to the fact that about half of these funds are restricted to use for projects that do not exceed 60% area median income. And then the remaining can't exceed 80% of area median income. So again, no funding priorities, anything eligible will be considered. 80% of the available funds being made available through the RFP. And then on page 8 is the scoring criteria, which the two boards, Homeless Services and Affordable Housing, have tried very hard to have very similar scoring criteria. I won't read all of it, but the board's put a lot of time and thought into how projects should be scored, including some significant points for supporting vulnerable and historically disadvantaged populations, and also the leadership of the organization as being by and for or BIPOC leadership. So with the RFP, again, recommending 80% be made available, 80% of the funding for the RFP, and 20% be set aside for Opportunity Fund. No funding priorities and the scoring criteria listed on page 8.
Anybody have questions for Jacinda?
I do.
Michael?
Can you talk a little bit about the removal of staff capacity and timeliness from the criteria chart?
Yeah, so the staff capacity and timeliness were removed for the homeless services scoring criteria, but the affordable housing capital is still considering those items.
So historically, those have not been considered by the homeless services because those are really focused on the capital, whether they have the capacity to do the construction projects and the timeliness related to the federal funds to spend those projects, where homeless services are more service-based, and so those factors are not considered as applicable for the homeless services. So that isn't a change from how those have been scored in the past.
Oh, okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Anybody else have questions? And then Alex, were you gonna talk about the 20%?
I have one more thing, Ken.
Jacinta, I keep trying to cut you off. I thought you were done.
Just go.
Is there a decision needed on?
There is a decision needed.
And do you want us to make a decision on this before you move to the next, to the RFI stuff?
It's up to you all. I think it would be easier, but it's up to you all.
All right. Well, do I hear a motion?
You're making all the motions.
You are very productive today. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Move to approve the 2024 request for proposals as proposed.
I'll second that for you.
Second from Trevor. All right. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Okay, motion carries. Jacinda?
Okay. So I'll try not to get too confusing with y'all, and I want to invite Talana to jump in if she has anything to add as well as our chair of our board. So historically, at the same time that the request for proposals has gone out to solicit projects happening within the next year or so, a request for information has also gone out. The timing is the same, the application looks slightly different. The intent of the RFI is to place projects into our housing pipeline. So we know what projects are going to be coming up, what projects are going to need our funding, what projects are going to move on to seek other funding, and we can plan. Just as a little bit of background here that I won't spend too much time on, we stopped issuing that RFI in 2021. So our pipeline currently only goes through this year on paper. So we are picking that back up this year. And this is, again, something that the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has spent some significant time on. And what they have come up with and what they're recommending to this board is to indeed pick up issuing the RFI again, to essentially try to make up for not issuing it by soliciting projects that will be placed into the pipeline for 2025, 2026, and 2027. So in this year, in 2024, we'll solicit projects for 3 years. So we'll fill out our pipeline for the 3 years, essentially making up for those years that we skipped issuing the RFI. The other recommendation that they have is setting aside 60% of funding in 25, 26, and 27 for those projects that are placed into the pipeline. So essentially that would look like in any given year, 20% would go to be issued through the RFP for projects occurring more immediately, 60% for projects that are occurring in the next few years, and then the 20% for the opportunity fund that Alex Wilson talked about. Like the RFP, the board has also decided not to limit projects or set priorities. around what projects they want to elevate or consider, which means again for 25, 26, and 27, multifamily rental, single family rental, home ownership, rehabilitation and preservation activities and acquisition. I will say the one thing that the board did decide not to solicit applications for in these 3 years is a rental assistance. So only for 2024 with the RFP will rental assistance applications be accepted. Same funding sources. We don't do a 3-year projection out. So hopefully our funding levels stay fairly the same or grow. But again, most of those funds are directed at 60% area median income, with some going up to 80. And then the scoring criteria that the board is recommending is also very similar to what you just saw in the RFP, with the one slight difference being an acknowledgement that the leadership of a organization may change in 1 or 2 or 3 years. So there's a slightly lower point value associated with that supports vulnerable and historically disadvantaged populations, or the makeup of the leadership entity. So still prioritized, but slightly lower points because things change over time. So again, RFI soliciting for 3 years, no priorities, scoring criteria listed here on page 9. Any questions?
Jacinda, the only thing sorry.
Go ahead.
The thing I wanted to add also was that for the financial capacity and projects, we added project sustainability to make sure that we made that clear that we would be looking at that on the applications. But as far as the buy-in for organizations, the thought was to be very intentional about not being performative when we say that we're prioritizing organizations. So that's why we changed the scoring criteria on that.
Thank you, Talana. Carlina?
Not a question, but really just a comment in general. I think it's really great that 60% of the funding will be put into pipeline projects. That's one thing that we've heard over the years, that they haven't felt supported as we've had these pipeline projects beforehand. And I think this is just a good way, making sure that we're putting that funding aside specifically for these projects and actually making them a reality. So just great job to staff and the advisory board on this proposal.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback onto it. I'm really glad that we're bringing the pipeline back, because all of these projects that we're working on they're years in the making, right? And it just helps everybody plan better and coordinate better when you can kind of see what's coming down the pipeline. So just commend staff for and the advisory board for working on bringing this back into practice.
All righty. Anything else for us, Jacinda? All right. Alex,
do we need
I do need a motion. I do need a motion.
The motion. See, you're not letting go.
I do need a motion.
All right. Do I hear a motion?
There'd be a motion to approve RFI priorities, processes, and scoring criteria.
Second.
Perfect. Thank you. Well done. We'll let you be the motion.
There we go.
Good job,
We'll alternate.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Oops. Oops, I'll just like you. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. And now.
And now.
All right, so our next item is 2 proposals for off-cycle emergency funding requests for both affordable housing and for homeless services. So for many years, we've had emergency requests come in for funding, and we've long desired a very clear process that was laid out for both affordable housing opportunities as well as for homeless services. The Community Investment Project or Program, the CIP. I always forget the P too. If it's not my acronym, I'm not going to remember it. So they did have a policy in place for emergency requests. But was related largely to homeless services. So we are going to present to you today both the Affordable Housing's proposed policy and then the Homeless Services Advisory Board's policy based on the CIP policy from before.
Now it's my turn.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I am going to present on the RHC Opportunity Fund Request Policy. As Jacinda had mentioned, the board has decided, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board has decided to create the Opportunity Fund that will allow for the review and possible funding of off-cycle requests. And as Jacinda stated, they are setting aside 20% of the annual allocation to the Opportunity Fund. I do want to note that this request, they are intending to include requests for activities that support the preservation of manufactured and mobile home parks. I know that's been a specific focus of the Regional Housing Council. So they want to include those requests into the Opportunity Fund. So as part of the RFP process, the annual RFP process, as I said, the Affordable Housing Advisory Board recommends to reserve a portion of local funds, so the 20% for capital projects for off-cycle requests. The policy presented here provides an overview of eligibility criteria and the process for how a request will be made to the Opportunity Fund. So I'm not going to read all this criteria to you, but it is available on page 10 of your packet. I do want to note that these funds are primarily intended to be used for acquisition. Rehabilitation may be appropriate when accompanied by acquisition of a property or building. So just to note that this fund is not largely for focusing on new construction projects, but other projects that have more immediate needs. Other considerations that have been made by the Affordable Housing Advisory Board when reviewing these requests is, does this project present an urgent or emergent need for our community, and what are the possible negative and impacts that this project might have if it was not funded? And then the process for this off-cycle funding request would be that the Opportunity Funds request will be made often RFI, the application that's used for the request for information. So it'll be a similar application. The application would come to the RHC tech team, and then the tech team would review for eligibility. And then if eligible, the application would then move to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. They will determine if it is a priority or a critical project for our region, and then they will decide to recommend the project to be funded and that funding amount. Then the Affordable Housing Advisory Board will present their recommendation to the RHC, and then the RHC, if the RHC decides to recommend the project for funding, Thurston County Office of Housing and Homeless Prevention will recommend to the Board of County Commissioners at its next available meeting. So generally speaking, we hope that this process takes around 2 months and no longer than 4 months, unless additional information is requested from the applicant.
Okay, can you review the funding for it?
The funding for, do what? Yeah, it's on this page. I don't know what she's looking here.
So that 20% is taken out of the total allocation, that total almost 9 million. So that'd be about 1.8 million that would be made available for the Opportunity Fund in this
2024.
Yes.
2024, all right. Thank you.
A quick question about that. Does that number, does that compound if it's not used in a certain year? Does it essentially double year after year?
So the RHC can decide to either roll over the unused funds back into the following year's annual RFP, or to just retain it and reserve it for future Opportunity Fund.
Okay, let me get Michael first. Is that a new hand, Michael? Okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate this proposal because this is something we've grappled with multiple times. And I think having a policy in place is fantastic because, of course, when anyone, shows up with a proposal and they're always the best ideas. And it's so hard to distinguish and try to make tough choices about them. But my question is about the process. So obviously we recommend approval of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board recommendations, so that goes to the BOCC. But what happens in instances where we have respectfully come to a different conclusion from the board's recommendation? I think under our bylaws, it then reverts back to the board for reconsideration. Would that be a similar process that would happen with this as well, if we come to a different conclusion?
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say yes. So within the ILA, it's laid out the process of how the recommendation goes from the RHC to the Board of County Commissioners and what happens, what that kind of looks like if the Board of County Commissioners has a different opinion or wants to send it back to the RHC. So it would still fall under the same process that's outlined in the interlocal agreement for the RHC.
I was asking if the RHC, if we come to a different conclusion than the recommendation from the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. So one step behind that, but that's also.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think, doesn't that, I thought we talked about this, I thought the ILA means like it would still go back to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board for further discussion. But then ultimately, the Regional Housing Council, this body would have the ultimate say in whether it's funded or not.
Okay.
Well,
Recommended for funding.
yes. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that if we did disagree with the recommendation, that the Affordable Housing Advisory Board would have another bite at the apple, that we would still maintain that due process. So that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry for misunderstanding.
Okay, Dan?
Yeah, I wanted to really thank staff and the advisory board for working on this policy. And so for like some context for some folks who are new to this is we just went through our process of, setting up our RFPs for, how we're going to do funding in 2024. But sometimes like mid 2024, after we've already gone through the whole RFP process, an emergency will come up or some project will come up. Most recently we've talked about a manufactured home community that is at risk of, losing their land, their homes. And so, it's come up a couple of times where off-cycle funding requests have come to the RHC because an organization reaches out to us and we always want to help. And so it's great to have a policy in place so that, and I think this strikes a really good balance with moving quickly, but honoring our processes, honoring the people that we've appointed to advise us. And so I'm really glad to see this. I'm really happy to support it. And as I was reading through it, I'd be like, well, why'd they say that? And then the next sentence would answer my question. So I think it's very well thought out. And I think it's really going to help us when tough emergent decisions get in front of us.
Great. I hope you're taking that in, Talona.
You already know. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. All right.
I think we need approval of
Yeah.
the.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, was there anything else on that before we go
No,
to a
I'm
motion?
good if you all.
Okay, I keep jumping the shark here, so let's make sure. All right,
So motion to approve off-cycle funding request policies?
yes,
Second.
okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion for off-cycle funding policies? Please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay.
All right.
Productive day. I like it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so similar to that policy, we have the Regional Housing Council Homeless Services Emergency Fund Policy and Procedures for Homeless Services. The purpose is to provide an interim solution specifically to an urgent an acute problem that was unforeseen by the applicant. Emergency and urgent are intended to describe the needs of Thurston County who face significant impacts if something isn't funded. So it's really focused on the health and safety. Is the health and safety of vulnerable people in our community going to be impacted? And how and why if a project is not funded or an emergency need isn't met. We call out, this is similar to the previous policy from the CIP, is not intended to provide to solely address emergency needs based on budgeting shortfalls. However, there was a lot of discussion in our advisory board around recognizing that budget gaps or funding gaps can cause an emergency. So there's a kind of a teeter-totter in that thought, but the idea is this is an urgent need that is going to cause harm to vulnerable people if not funded. So here is you can see the $200,000 is the funding amount that is set aside at this time. That could be added to, different funding sources can be added to that by the Regional Housing Council. But as it stands right now, it's $200,000 set aside. In terms of submitting a request, services that are homeless services related or specific, shelters, outreach, anything that we normally fund through our funding sources at the Homeless Services Advisory Board side of things would be considered eligible under CHG guidelines, under the definition of the services that we contract through our office. There are some examples here that have come up in the last year. Those are just to provide some context of what might come up as a request, but it's not limited to those things. The advisory board wanted to see some examples spelled out. So the process would be the agency that had a request for emergency funding would create an application or a narrative that would address why it's needed, how it's specifically addressing the health and safety, differentiating between the existing homeless response and this current need, how it intends to fund the services ongoing, if it's a service that we expect to be ongoing, unless it's a one-time event. Sustainability. There's no alternative sources of funding, and how did you determine that? Let us know. And then a budget specifying how the funds would be used. We would evaluate those, or the Homeless Services Advisory Board would evaluate the requests by determining eligibility, not necessarily just under the $2163. That isn't necessary just to that. It would be any funds that were determined to be utilized for the set aside. And then we would evaluate, like, if we fail to provide these emergency funds, would it reduce or eliminate an existing service? Would it address an imminent and clear threat? And would it result in the displacement of homeless or formerly homeless adults? And then finally, is this agency in good standing with the county currently? Similar process for the Homeless Services Advisory Board. The request would be submitted. The Homeless Services Advisory Board would review. They would make a recommendation for approval or not to the Regional Housing Council, et cetera. So it's a pretty similar or identical processes really to the affordable housing policy. This is, it was determined by the Homeless Services Advisory Board that they would like to renew or look at these annually to review, as we worked on this for 2 meetings, and there's more we'd like to get into, more we'd like to look at, and we want to see how this policy works if enacted for the next year.
Okay, questions for Keely?
Good question.
Danny?
So would the timeline for this be the same as it would be for the capital project acquisitions that we just discussed?
We wrote into our decision-making process that if there is, it's determined by the schedule of meetings, of course. So when is the next advisory board meeting, next RHC, next Board of County Commissioners, which could slow things down. as per the 2 to 4 months that is written specifically in the affordable housing policy. However, we wrote into this policy that if there is an urgent need, we don't have, is another month out before the advisory board meets, we will call for an emergency meeting
Okay, thank you.
to speed up the process if we can.
Can I just want to add something for the manufactured home parks. Those notices are only 70 days. So it might be good to consider that if we have a timely response for only a 70-day notice for residents, we consider that for an option too.
For the one that we just made a decision on?
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh.
if we're looking to call an emergency meeting, if that's the case, then it might just be something to consider that if tenants only receive a 70-day notice before the park is sold, emergency meeting might need to come into effect for something like that.
Okay, but that's not incorporated into the policy we just voted on. So that is something that we should consider for a future change. Okay, that's good to highlight. Thank you, Darian. I was thinking about this in the context of what we just voted on is like, acquisitions, which, generally can take a longer time. Generally, like, you would have a little bit more time, except in that situation, whereas here, this is like, we're just talking about what if we run out of cold weather funds and they need to apply for emergency funds and they have to wait 2 to 4 months to see if they can get additional funds. Like, that's not satisfactory. So I'm glad that there is something in here that will be able to call an emergency meeting and fully consider it, but on a quicker timeline.
Okay, and just for my clarification, the $200,000 mentioned here, is that the same $200,000 in the set aside?
Correct.
Okay. Alrighty.
Sure, Cox, Robin has a question.
Robin.
If I may.
Yes, please.
I'm curious, who did the designers of the policy see as the entities coming forward with these requests? Who do you think is going to bring the request?
Historically, it's been currently contracted nonprofit providers, which speeds things up quite significantly because oftentimes it could be an amendment that could be made to an existing contract, depending on the project. But we have, for homeless services, it's been providers that have come forward.
Would this preclude a jurisdiction from coming forward with a request to the committee?
I don't see jurisdictions being excluded in the language.
And then a jurisdiction coming forward would need to follow this same process.
Yes.
Okay. Does that get your question answered, Robin? Okay. Any other questions? All right, call for the vote then. All in favor, please say aye.
Did we make a motion?
I thought Trevor made the motion. Did you make the
Oh, is this
motion?
is it a separate decision or?
This is a separate one, and we still on.
Separate.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I can make one, absolutely.
Yeah, you
Go
go
for it,
ahead,
Trish.
man. You're on a
Motion
roll.
to approve
You
of City
are.
Regional Housing Council Homeless Services Emergency Fund Policy and Procedures for Homeless Services.
Second. Okay, hearing no other comment, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All
Yes,
righty.
we're just getting stuff done today.
Yes, we are. So, we ready to move on to the right-of-way update? Okay. It's Tom and Keely just disappeared on us.
Just
so-
disappeared and she was gonna kick us off, but I will kick us off until we get back. So we've talked a lot over the last 2 years, right-of-way initiative, especially for some of the newer members, and geez, what was it, 2022? Governor Inslee started a right-of-way initiative to clear those living unsheltered along the state's rights of way, specifically along I-5. 5 camps were initially identified as part of that. Kind of under the guise of this body, we submitted an application to the Department of Commerce and received substantial funding, I think it's fair to say, to support some projects. Specifically the acquisition of the former Days Inn in Lacey, the construction of a 50-unit tiny home village off Franz Anderson Road in Olympia, as well as supporting the operations of some shelter beds at Unity Commons. That's been going on for a little while now. All 5 of those encampments have been cleared and people have been offered better housing solutions than they presently had. And I'm gonna turn this over to you, Keely, real quick.
I
here.
had to take care of
I
business.
know. In the last couple months, Department of Commerce has added a few new sites under the right-of-way initiative, and we've been working to address those. One of those is on the Department of Enterprise Services property in Lacey. There's also one in off Percival Creek, which has multi-jurisdictional. All these have multi-jurisdictional kind of interests in them. So there's been discussions over the last couple months around those. I'm going to turn it over to Keely. She had a nice spiel all prepared.
Scribbled. So I wanted to start by really quickly, just taking us back to when the Deschutes encampment was cleared. It was really hard. It was very hard for Thurston County. All jurisdictions were impacted by that, and from that process, the Public Health and Social Services, led by then interim director Kurt Hardin, reached out and we started talking about, can we develop a process or sub task force that we could have kind of a best practices laid out around how do we do this? How do we engage with encampments as jurisdictions? How do we have how do we lay this out? And so he tasked our office to create, I believe this is the acronym, it's not mine, but I think I have it right, the Homeless Encampment Abatement Resolution Task Force, or the HART. And the intent of that task force, which was presented to the Regional Housing Council, was to create a task force similar to the Hazardous Weather Task Force, where there would be a place that we would all come together to discuss the relocation or the address encampment concerns as a body with shared values, with public health potentially leading the way or not, because homelessness is a public health crisis. So then that started in May. We had that finalized in, I think, May of 2022, and June of 2022 is when right-of-way happened. And HART and that effort kind of went out the window because the right-of-way kind of took over clearing the encampments that you just described, Tom. And so in 2022, June is when all of this began for all of us. We've, as you said, those 5 original camps were cleared or resolved, including City of Olympia's Nickerson Street Camp. And during that process in the fall, we started discussing what comes next between the 2 other remaining camps, Desmond and Percival. And on January 2nd was when the Department of Commerce had let us know that indeed we're moving forward with Desmond. And it was the next week that moving started happening, partially sped up because of the hazardous weather event that was occurring that week. And from that point, there's been a question of the by name list, who lives out there, how many people live out there. And I think, I was thinking about this today, and I know everyone in this room, our providers, the Regional Housing Council, our tech team, our advisory boards, our community members, Department of Commerce, Department of Enterprise Services, all of us agreed that we desire for people who are living in our community that are vulnerable and living unsheltered to be offered meaningful housing options. We all want that. We have a very compassionate community, and we all recognize that each individual is unique. Their circumstances for becoming homeless are unique to them and require time to make meaningful offers so that they're more successful in their housing options, because there's not a one-size-fits-all response to homelessness that's going to work for everyone. So in a perfect world, we have the time that we need to assess each individual or household for what's going to work for them. And in a perfect world, we have the units available for them that make that match. And then they're successful. That would be ideal. That would be great. Ideally, we wouldn't have to do any encampment clearing because everybody would have a home. But it's the time part that we don't have. We have the resources to a certain extent through the right-of-way, Maple Court, various housing projects, Franz Anderson, Plum Street, Quinn Street, all of these projects that are resources available to us. We have funding available to us through the right-of-way and now the encampment resolution program, but we don't have time. What I understand, and I may be wrong, is that at the end of the day, really, after talking to City of Lacey staff and Department of Commerce, and Olymap, who's the contracted provider, that we really need to know if the Department of Enterprise Services can say yes to creating a new by name list and allow a week for creating that by name list if there is actually an offer of housing at the end of it. Because the reason why people are not engaging, we don't know how many people are out there, is because they're afraid of being trespassed. And so they don't engage with outreach, they don't engage with anyone, they hide because they are aware that there's a trespassing, that they would be trespassed. So providers are saying that this is the experience that people are describing. In a meeting on Tuesday, Prince Booker, who is the shelter manager for Maple Court, said, "Tell me how many rooms you need and tell me a timeline." And I guess some remodeling, not remodeling, but some repairs need to be made to some of the units. That will take some time, but he said, "Tell me how many people there are and I will ensure that number of rooms are ready to go within a week to 2 weeks, but just tell me how many." So it seems like the biggest question is how many people, and can we have the time to make that by name list? A week is what was stated as the fastest time turnaround for creating that list. And then can we give that new by name list to Commerce and move from there? And to me, that's the kind of the crux, having 100,000 conversations about this in the last 2 weeks. And it also opens the door for a larger, broader conversation about we will have more situations like this. We're gonna have more encampments. We're gonna have to make hard decisions and partner together as the Regional Housing Council. Is it time now to start thinking about reinstituting the HEART or including the Lived Experience Housing Steering Committee in these conversations, because they come from lived experience, some of them quite recently. They have some expertise that we don't have at this table. We have it at advisory boards level for sure. So that's my preamble and my perspective, and there you go.
Questions?
So are we in a holding pattern right now, waiting to hear back from Department of Enterprise Services?
I believe so.
Okay.
I don't know.
Is that square, Robin?
No, that was not my understanding, but I had a conversation, I would defer to the City of Lacey. Well, my
The City of Lacey
conversation-
is not the Department of Enterprise Services, so if
Right.
we're waiting on the Department of Enterprise Services, I don't know that information.
No.
So I do know that our legal team is in consultation with the Attorney General's office as well as our own insurance company about kind of next steps.
Right.
I think there's more than just Department of Enterprise Services. There's also Department of Commerce and other state agencies. So I think right now it's in the hands of our legal team to try to figure out, what could be done there. I think, when we met on Friday as an executive team, I think it comes down to kind of a couple asks potentially of the RHC. And number one, my understanding was some kind of communication from the RHC, whether it's a letter or something to as a concerned, group that would give some direction to some state agencies, potentially Department of Enterprise Services and Commerce, to allow some additional time for some work to be done out there and potentially generate an additional by names list. I think that's the first request. My understanding was the second request was to, now that the right-of-way program is nearing completion, and we have these rooms available to us, is a second request specifically to the Department of Commerce to open up the balance of any additional rooms for use by coordinated entry. So I believe that was what we talked about on Friday as part of the RHC executive team to kind of give some direction for the RHC to take at today's meeting.
So the request of the RHC then, let me know if I got this wrong, is for us to direct staff to write a letter to DES Commerce, whoever needs to get it, for additional time and to create a new by name list.
Correct. And then as part of that too, this new by names list would be essentially the first on any list to be able to utilize the housing if and when it comes available. So, you know, there may be some additional rooms at Maple Court, there may be some at Unity Commons and some other places that may be able to be utilized as part of the program. I think that the crux maybe from, you know, if you're a state agency is that, you know, they want to make sure that these people are placed through the right-of-way program. Those people, you know, aren't necessarily on the DES property right now. They come and go, and they're not located in the right-of-way. So we need to be able to find them, to locate them, to be able to put them into housing. And so, you know, part of the request is to address some of those logistics, if you will, on how that might happen.
Can I ask yeah, I just wanna ask a follow-up, and maybe our right-of-way meetings are early and often confusing. But from what I've heard from Commerce, when we were curious, like why this site closure was diverting from what we have done before, what we've heard Nathan say is like, we're following Lacey's process. We're deferring to Lacey, what Lacey wants to do. But what I'm hearing you say is that now that you all wanna ask the Department of Commerce to do something, but Commerce says we're deferring to Lacey. Are we lost in communication here, or what?
I think so. You know, they're not following us. What we're doing is we have an agreement. Hopefully people have had a chance to kind of look at some of we've provided a one-sheeter there, some of the timeline that's going on.
But I'm not tracking some of what's on there still,
So we've got an agreement with Department of Enterprise Services that goes back to 2021 on how they, as the property owner, wanted to handle the property. And so our police officers have been, you know, acting per that agreement. And so, you know, we're acting at the request of the Department of Enterprise Services. We're not going out there. So for example, to issue a trespass notice, we're not going out there without DES authorizing that.
I will add that my board asked me to have a conversation with Department of Enterprise Services. I talked to the program manager there, and with the intent of commissioners to come to this committee with the request for resources for the additional people. We asked for 1 week. They said we could have 1 week, and it's my understanding their intent is to proceed this week with the trespass. So I
It's the
don't.
intent of DES.
DES, they are the property owners.
Yeah.
So it was my understanding that they were proceeding this week and that the legal review is about a completely different issue brought by a representative of some of the people who are on that property. That is completely separate from the concern that my county commissioners had.
So that's square with you, with your understanding?
Yeah, so the review is with the folks that are there now. We did receive some reasonable accommodation requests, both directed towards the state agencies as well as our police department. And so we're trying to figure out how to handle that.
Okay. And one thing I sought clarification on and was explained to me is that if a trespass citation is handed out to an individual out there, it's kind of like getting a traffic ticket. You know, you don't go, you're not toted off to jail. You get a court date and a process that can take several weeks plays out. So it's like nobody's going in, laying hands on people, laying hands on their things. It's like going in and saying, if you're not on the list, then you are trespassing and here's your notice. And that process then begins. Did I get that right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So just for clarification, because I think there's been some ramped up feelings about it and yeah, Carolina?
So I think as a region, we do need to send a letter and have a sort of response. Since the right-of-way project started, the jungle has grown. And whenever, I think this is just kind of a consequence to all of this, right? As encampments are being cleared, they're moving into the other jurisdictions. And so a lot of the individuals that are now in Desmond came from the Hobby Lobby encampment, and they didn't make it onto this list. And right, so we're just kind of moving people from encampment to encampment as it's getting cleared, and we're not really kind of getting to the crux of the issue. And so I think requesting for them to be added to the list and being able to fund these services through the right of way, I think will be very powerful if a letter is sent from the region as a whole saying, like, we would like for these individuals to be added to that right of way project. Because I really don't think that we can continue to just move people from encampment to encampment and knowing that we're gonna have to address it one time or another. I mean, I was just really surprised to hear how much the jungle has grown since the right-of-way project started. And that's something that, we're going to have to address sooner rather than later as well.
Keely?
If I can give a very sad and poignant example of why moving people around is not great, is there was a person who was at the Slater Kitty Camp, was moved into Maple Court through the right of way, was exited from Maple Court for whatever reason, moved to Desmond, and passed away 2 days ago. So the stress of moving is not good for people who have substance use. And I understand that the process of trespassing is, has a process that isn't immediate. Doesn't feel good to be trespassed. It's scary, and it's not the first time. And so it increases stress, potential escalations that are unnecessary. It can lead to higher use of substances. There's a number of impacts from these processes that we don't feel, but they certainly do. And so just heard that yesterday, and I was.
Yeah, well, another thing a trespass does is it enters somebody into the criminal justice system. They have a court date, that they have to figure out how to get to. They have to track and manage. But I wanted to follow up on something that you said, Keely, is that there was someone from Sleater Kinney who went to Maple Court. That didn't work out for whatever reason, so they went to Desmond. But it sounds like, if that person was still around today, the option that would be put in front of them would be Maple Court.
No, according to what is happening right now, they would be trespassed.
Oh, well, but if we asked for more folks to be put on the by name list, that person was there, Maple Court would be the option for them, but it didn't.
Or Quinn Street Village, or.
Okay, so there are, that's what I wanna get at, is like, are we giving people like circular options here? Yeah, no, I recognize that as things stand now, it would be like, sorry, you need to go. And there's no funding to support the next option for that person. Whereas if we were able to get everybody on the by name list, which is what I think should happen, like, these are state goals at this point, that's the tie to get the funding to support people onto the next step, is to get them on the by name list. I fully support us working on a letter together to come together as a region and say, hey, this is what we need to make this work.
Okay, Michael?
Thanks. So the reason why, just to make sure I'm tracking, the reason why we need Commerce and DES to approve is because the MOU for Maple Court is a collaborative agreement with those state agencies specifically for the right-of-way initiative. So what happens for the approval? Can you remind me what happens for the approval process when the right-of-way initiative lapses, which it almost has at that point? Do we have greater discretion for making those units available for other people more flexibly?
Yes, so at this point, under the right-of-way initiative, under the agreements, Commerce is basically holding on those beds, and only people who are on an approved right-of-way list, by names list, are eligible to move into those units. And that is really, we're at the whim of Commerce to kind of approve whatever by name list is presented to them. And they've said they're willing to, right now, DES, Lacey has a by name list, that's what they're going with. They've indicated if DES wanted to update that list and provide an updated list, Commerce would accept that, is what they've indicated to us. But until Commerce says, we release these beds back to your community as a resource, we don't have access to those, to place people in these units, until Commerce gives us that kind of authorization to do so. We are hopeful that will be happening soon. As we've said, we've kind of cleared the 5 initial encampments. There's Desmond and Percival still coming up. They said they may have 1 or 2 others, kind of very small, kind of 1s and 2s, that they may be looking at. But we think we're getting close to the end of that. But until Commerce actually releases that, we don't as a community truly have access to those beds, except for people who are approved under the right-of-way initiative.
And can I just
Yeah.
add on? And thank you, Michael, for that question, because it kind of leads into the second part of the request of that kind of Ryan mentioned, which was sending a letter to Department of Commerce to release those beds to the region, and kind of going through what Tom said. And so sending another letter kind of requesting that as well. So we have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to these situations.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say, is like, it seems like if we are denied from DES for adding people to the by name list, then the obvious backup strategy is to try to get control of the beds on a voluntary basis by Commerce release. So that, you're suggesting, Carolina, that there's sort of a 2-phase approach where we try a letter to Commerce and DES, and if that fails, then we say, well, the least you could do is please release some of these beds to the community because the program is lapsing anyway.
I was just thinking, hit them with the 1-2 punch.
One letter, 2 points.
I think it's important to
Oh, okay.
realize, though, that this is 2 separate state agencies. It's the Department of Enterprise Services owns this property, and that's who Lacey has been working with for the last 2 years. The Department of Commerce is the state agency who is operating the rights of way and has control of the beds and the lists. So when you might send a letter to both agencies, but each agency is going to decide independently what they do.
Okay. I mean, if both those asks are in one letter, does it make it easier to say no to the second one, to the first one? I don't know if that's a strategic decision on what to ask for first and at what chance, but it seems like if they're both making different decisions, that it's easier for DES to say, no, you should ask Commerce to release those beds to the community. But I haven't been working with them, so I don't really have any insight on whether that has merit or not.
Certainly address your letter to the governor, who has some oversight over both agencies.
That's a thought. Keely, and then you had a hand too?
Yeah, you go ahead, maybe you'll.
I was just gonna suggest that it seems like the by name list and time request is specifically to DES, and the releasing beds is specifically to Commerce.
I knew it.
CCing the governor.
I knew you were gonna say exactly what I was thinking, so I let you go first.
Yeah. So I think to be successful with this, we need to put some parameters on it, like an estimated population, a specific timeline and all, because I don't think they're gonna react very favorably to anything less than that. That's too amorphous.
All estimates from 2 different sources are maximum 15, between 8 and 15. So there's some 8 and 12 estimates, and that's because people will go and like take things and like go back to wherever they were hiding from, essentially. And the other is 12 to 15 is most likely, probably 12 seems to be the common denominator, so we'll go 12 about that.
Is OLIMAP going out there?
Yes. And 2 weeks would be ideal from, yes.
2 weeks
To
from.
get that by name list would be ideal because there's not, the people that are not on the by name list don't have established relationships with providers or with Mott or crew because they have been hiding so that they don't get trespassed. So it would require some trust, like not trust building, but here is these are the housing options that will be made available to you through this program. Do you want to talk to me now? You know, get on the by name list. But if it's just, and I'm concerned that if it comes, like, here's offer of housing, also, it's just a technical trespass, that would make it nearly impossible for a by name list to be built because they won't take the time to engage, because they'll just go, well, being trespassed, so catch you later.
Okay, Robin?
I think your approach is great, but at the same time, I would share that in my conversation with the program manager at Enterprise Services, she was extremely surprised to hear that there was anyone else out there other than those who were currently on the buy list, because it was supposed to be a closed camp. And she, while she was happy to grant us 1 week, she said that she was going to have to do quite a bit more research because she insisted that there was no one else out there. And I said, you know, so sorry that was her perception, but we knew that there were more. They
Put
will
that in the
want
letter.
to know. But they will want to know, you know, their perception was that it was a closed camp 2 years ago. The original list was created 2 years ago. They've been working towards closing this camp for 2 years. And so what is to prevent, once you create this new buy list 2 weeks from now, what's to prevent even more people coming? How will that be stopped? And that's what they're going to want to know before they give us any more time at all.
Keely, you had your hand up first. Do you wanna? It's my impression, and I know that it would probably be backed up by anyone who engages out there, that camp has been for, like, if people have been hiding for 2 years, they're not gonna suddenly show up if there's a fear of there being trespassing. So I think that the likelihood of that is very different than something like Slater-Kinney.
I think it also, I think it's quite naive of DES as well to not believe that there was more people in there. I mean, when there's just thinking of the human factor and the survival aspects of just, you know, these individuals, like if there's a safe encampment, like of course it's gonna grow. And I think just with the fear that there are notices of trespasses that are gonna be given out, I think just the mere fact that some of these individuals are hiding every time they see OLIMAP or anyone else come through the camp because of that fear. I don't think it's gonna allow for really any growth when already some of these individuals have actually left that encampment and gone somewhere else because you know, so I know that those numbers have reduced since this whole process started as well. So I don't think there's fear that it's gonna grow.
Something else to share that we heard at the right-of-way call on Tuesday is that throughout the other encampment closures, we've been told pretty clearly to homeless response and to providers on when the trespass was going to be. Here's the trespass date, here's when we'll be there. And our team prepared extensive notices a week before, 3 days before, a day before on when that was going to happen. Because we have those relationships, it was communicated to us. Then we were told on Tuesday that that date was being kept from us, that they weren't going to tell us when that trespass was gonna be because they were afraid of protesters. And so another example that this one is just being acted on so much different than the rest when we've had 5 successful closures. And so it's just so different than what we've done before. And now we haven't been able to engage with people early on consistently with clear messaging to talk about those trespasses because they're like blatantly withholding the trespass from people.
Interesting. Well, I mean, Lacey's police, our community resource unit and mobile outreach team have been engaging almost daily and have been, I mean, these people have known for a long, long time that we're getting accommodations for you. Here's what you need to do. And so, I mean, it's not like everybody's living along merrily and then suddenly, we're gonna change the rules on you. It's been pretty much for several years an understanding that these are the sanctioned list of people who live here. We're trying to find housing for each one of you. The list got down to 8 people after other people had found other accommodations. And the whole plan was to shrink it down to 0 all along. That's been the case of what our agreement with the state has been. So I don't want there to be an impression here that we're changing the rules or our process. It's just, that's where we've been. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, the only thing I will add is that with the last 4 remaining folks on the site, it is complicated matters with their ADA requests. And so that's, I think, thrown a little bit into, question exactly when, the date may come that they'll be trespassed. We don't know. So those discussions are underway. Those are much higher level legal discussions that, nobody outside of our city attorney is involved in at this point, so.
Right. And then the other understanding I have is alluding to people hiding, that when our mobile outreach team and CRU is out there and there are other individuals, they identify themselves only as visitors, that we don't live here. And so I think that's another explanation for why they're not showing up in the count that DES was aware of. So I may be stating the obvious, Keely.
Oh, just pointing out the and.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Robert.
Yeah, so when we get around to writing this letter to the state, or maybe I think a point that needs to be made is the pressure of time, because I'm under a good impression that it's a matter of time before the owner of the land in the jungle is going to start pushing those people out of there, or requesting to push people out of there. And so to avoid more capacity problems that we already have, I think that applying some very direct language to the state on what we need, and telling them that there are other areas that are not a part of the right of way that can go into the right of way if they don't step up. So.
Okay.
Could I help put a point on this? Put a fine point on what we've been discussing?
Sure.
So it sounds like I'm hearing consensus among all of us that we want to get a letter into Department of Enterprise Services asking that they give more time. I heard 2 weeks as a timeline, and that and to increase the by name list for all people who will actually be displaced as a result of clearing that encampment. And then also a letter to Commerce, maybe after we hear back from DES, maybe immediately around opening up beds. Once right away is complete, give us control of those beds so we can start operating our coordinated entry system and doing what we know how to do down here on the ground. So I've heard that. I think there's consensus around it. There's also a short timeline here. So I'm wondering, could we direct staff to write these letters and work with our chair and vice chair to review and get those out the door as quickly as possible? How does that, did I capture everything?
If I may, I just wanted to add one thing that we I think should always be highlighting to the state is about the importance of continued funding flowing from the state to support the operation of the facilities that have been set up through the right-of-way dollars. So taking advantage of that with the letter going to Commerce.
Every chance we get.
Every chance we get, we should be highlighting that.
So did I capture everything there? Is everybody on the same page? Do we need a vote or is that good enough?
I think we need to vote to authorize staff to write the letter and the executive committee to approve and sign it.
So moved.
All right.
Seconded.
And seconded, all right.
Keep it rolling.
Anybody, comments, concerns?
Is
Michael.
there a way that the draft could get sent around to us in advance, just so we could see it? We obviously won't be voting on it again, but it would be nice to be able to see the draft.
Yeah, I just think,
Speed.
yeah, and just, if you get the draft, you'll probably have a day or less to react to it because there is a need for speed.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so all in favor of sending letters to both Commerce and Department of Enterprise Services? Shall we CC the governor on this too?
Sure.
Yeah,
Why
okay.
not?
Yeah, all right, all in
Yes.
favor?
Aye.
Please say aye.
Aye.
I think I sneaked in a friendly admit. All right. Whew, okay, on to advisory board recruitment update.
That's me. So the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and the Homeless Services Advisory Board are actively recruiting for new members. So on page 14, this is a nice announcement, thank you, that Elisa's put together and has, I believe, sent to you all before this meeting. But it kind of summarizes everything that I'm pretty much about to tell you. So for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, well, for both boards, the applications were released on the 17th of January and the application period will close on the 31st of January. We have created a new recruitment subcommittee, which is made up of staff and members from both advisory boards who kind of have taken this process on and have approved the application, questions, criteria, et cetera, and will be frontline of the applications, reviewing the applications and scoring them. So the Affordable Housing Advisory Board is recruiting for 3 open positions and the Homeless Services Advisory Board is recruiting for 4 open positions. They also have various emphasis on experience or representation in various areas that they're looking for specifically, which you can see listed here. But I would like to call out that both boards are specifically looking for representative from Tumwater, and the Affordable Housing Advisory Board is looking for another representative from Lacey. After the application period close, the new recruitment subcommittee will review for eligibility, and then the subcommittee members will recommend up to 10 people to interview for each board. We have tentatively scheduled or hold a time for interviews to be on February 12th to 14th. That is from 10 a.m. to approximately 4 p.m. Advisory board, RHC members are encouraged to attend if you would like to. You can reach out to me and I will loop you in on that process if you would like to sit in on any of those interviews. Then final recommendations will be made to the RHC from the subcommittee at your February meeting, so next month. And then new members will be brought on board into the advisory board meetings that are held in March. Like I said, Elisa has created this nice announcement that has gone out to you. We would just like to encourage jurisdictions to promote this announcement, especially ones looking for jurisdictional representation.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so this is an information update, so no action needed on that. Thank you.
Oh, there's Gary's got a hand up.
Gary, thank you. Gary, did you have a hand up?
Sorry, the unmute thing. So I'm not up to speed on who's currently on the advisory board. So are there any representatives from the city of Yelm?
We do have one on the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. That is Deb Larson, who is from Love Abounds here. We also have other members from unincorporated Thurston County, And I'm not sure about your board. if
No,
you have
we-
Representation from Yale.
Not at this time. We don't have representation from Yale. I did happen to see an application from somebody from Yale, no.
Yeah, I didn't closely read it when I saw the announcement come out, and we have a person in Yelm who's been really interested in housing issues, so I did forward this information to her, but I wasn't aware that they were that specific as to where they wanted them to live or work. So I guess we'll just see what happens.
Gary, Jacinda, those areas of, for lives in Tumwater, at least for the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, for both of them, the charter creating the boards specifically calls out representation from each of the RHC jurisdictions. So the lives in Tumwater is missing from both boards, and that's why that's included. The other bulleted points are areas of expertise or representation that evaluating the boards is missing among the current representation, but it's not limited to those. So if you have someone, not just in Yelm, that is interested but doesn't specifically meet these bullet points, that doesn't mean they can't apply or they won't be considered.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that explanation.
All right, we ready to move on? Okay, communications update with Lisa.
Okay, that's a good segue. So I can just add on to the advisory board recruitment that I did create some social media images and send those out to the communications people at each jurisdiction. So it's being pushed out kind of by all the jurisdictions. And the letter has gone out to, we have just massive like communications lists. So that went out. It's kind of been over the past week since the last Wednesday when we first opened those applications. And then the other piece that came out this week, which you all got emailed on Monday evening, is the Rights of Way Initiative 2023 snapshot. It's an infographic on page 16 in your packets. So that also has been shared with the different communication teams to be shared. It's just kind of to show what the Rights of Way Initiative has done over its kind of first full year, which is a lot. So we should all be really proud of this work, and as hard as it's been for everyone. So that's the other thing that's gone out. Then there's one other thing really quickly that on the communication plan for 2024, I'm working on starting a Thurston Regional Housing newsletter. So the newsletter will be for community members and kind of everybody who's interested in Thurston County housing and what's going on. And so my position is at Public Health and Social Services with Thurston County, and Thurston County itself is looking at getting new software for newsletters and kind of like notifications and that kind of thing, where people can easily sign up for the different things they're interested in. And that's kind of, that process is going kind of slowly right now for what we had decided on being the first, we wanted to get the first issue of the newsletter out by March. And so I kind of have the option of using the older newsletter software that we have, or waiting until we have the newer one, which I'm kind of, I think that waiting is better. So we do it really nice the first time and not have it look different after the first one. But I'm also pushing to see if we can have Public Health pilot the new software and see if the county, see if there's a way that we can just kind of say, hey, we're ready to go and get it first. And then have it be more broad. So there, it might be a little bit longer before the first issue comes out. But that's just to let you know. Hopefully we get the nice new software called Gov Delivery, and it's what Tacoma uses and some other places, and their stuff looks really nice, and I think it will help us. And then I also, another thing that we can do with it is have people sign up for like hazardous weather event notifications and things like that too. So I think the software itself will be really helpful to the whole homeless and housing crisis response system.
Great. Thank you. Okay, that brings us to our 2024 meeting schedule and locations.
Yes, so page 17, so I think we had this conversation in December. Looking at our 2024 meeting schedule, we have been in the atrium. Last year, we were kind of every other month. And towards the end of the year, this room wasn't always available, so we were kind of virtual more often than perhaps we liked. In talking with kind of the folks here at the county in terms of availability of this room, it doesn't look like this room is gonna be reliably available at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays every week. So we have had conversations with, Ryan's looked into the City of Lacey executive room. So I'm gonna recommend that we kind of move forward and take Lacey up on their generous offer to use the space at Lacey. As that's a little bit more reliable. So we've laid out, so that's kind of the first thing. The months here we've laid out, generally, we are at the 4th Wednesday of the month, every month. There are 3 exceptions that are important to note. The first one is May. We're asking that we have a meeting on the 2nd Wednesday of May 8th. The reason for this is because with our RFP, we need to finalize funding decisions in early May because we need to submit an annual action plan to HUD by the end of June. Really July 15th is technically our day. We need to have a 30-day public comment period for that and a public hearing. The Board of County Commissioners is going on a summer recess, so the last day we can do that public hearing is June 18th. So we need to have that annual action plan published by around May 18th. So we need the RHC decisions before that. So that's why we need to move up that May meeting in order for the timing to work out for the public processes for the federal funds. And then similar to this past year, moving up the November and December meetings to the 2nd Wednesday of those months, so we don't conflict with Thanksgiving and Christmas, kind of during the same week. So that's what our recommendation is. So looking to move forward with that schedule. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I'll just note that those 3 dates conflict with the lot board, which I understand sometimes starts at 6, but also sometimes starts at 5:30. Is that correct, Carolyn, when there's work sessions?
There's study session or work session starts at 5:30 and the actual business meeting doesn't happen until like 6:30.
Okay.
And so what I've done on the dates where it collided was they set me up in a conference room. So I'm on site there. And, you know, just as soon as we wrap this up, then I just go across the hall and into
So
the.
you show up late to the study sessions there?
Right.
Well, I'm wondering if for like, you know, I hear that in May, there is a very specific time crunch. So it probably, would it work to look at the 3rd Wednesday that month, or is that just make it unmanageable for folks, the 15th?
That's gonna be probably pushing it a little bit, but that's really cutting us. Sorry, we're just looking at the calendar. That'll be May 15th. Yeah, because we need to have the plan posted by
Yeah.
the 17th.
That's
So that really doesn't give us enough time.
Yeah, that makes sense. But for November and December, could we look at the 3rd Wednesday for those, which would be the 20th? It's still the week before Thanksgiving, so it's not right before Thanksgiving. And then the 18th instead of the 11th. And then that's once in the year that the 2 lot folks will have to, you know, hustle.
Yeah, that's.
Carolyn, you're also in intercity transit, which falls on those 2 dates that have just been suggested as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, all
You
right.
say it. I've got a triple whammy here.
Does changing the time help at all?
It does, if we could do it a bit earlier, I think. Yeah, but I'm not sure how that works for other particularly electeds who are trying to squeeze in a meeting after work. So But if we could change the meeting time for these days at least to 3 PM when we start, maybe more desirable for staff, but I'd like to hear from other electeds on as to whether that works for them.
Well, those with day jobs, let's hear from.
Is that me? So any time of the year I can do whatever other than this particular time of the year right now for in terms of day meetings. So that doing 3 PM in November, December, it would be totally fine.
So if we backed it up to say 3:30, does that work for staff and everybody else?
Well, we could just do 3 and have a break between meetings. I mean, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I do have EMS and they've been moving the date around on that, so it's either gonna be the second or third Wednesday at 3:30.
Okay.
But I haven't heard the final word yet on when EMS is gonna land.
Oh.
Yeah, it's not easy to make a change without rolling over somebody's toes here. So actually, I think I'm comfortable going with the schedule as presented. I've managed to get along just fine with the accommodation that Lot provides.
Okay.
And I think you being brand new to that, you will find that the director, Matt Kennelly, will set up monthly meetings with you if he hasn't already. And we'll go through the agenda beforehand for both the business meeting and the work session.
Okay.
And so rather than, mess with the rest of the group.
Yeah,
I'm just saying,
that's fine. If it's been workable for you, then
it's been a little tight, but I mean, they're very kind there. They actually, somebody's probably seen it on camera, they actually bring you a plate of food when you're stuck there.
it's great.
So,
Excellent.
Yeah.
I
so-
do think about, dinner.
yeah. So I'm gonna propose we go with the schedule as presented and
Are the lazy ones every other month?
So I think the record is every month at Lacey will always have the hybrid option, but will be in person every month with the hybrid option.
right.
Could we try to make sure that there's a hybrid option falling on that May 8th one where we know at least 2 of us will be virtual?
Yeah, there will always be a hybrid.
Hybrid.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
My brain is not computing as well as it was at the beginning of this meeting.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
Little
But
bundle.
but it will go back and forth between virtual and then in person at Lacey.
No, every month will be in person at
Every
Lacey.
With a hybrid option.
With the hybrid option.
meeting. Laughing at me, dear. Hybrid, dear. I'm sorry.
We always meet in Lacey, but there is a
Yes.
hybrid option.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it. I'm gonna write it in.
Oh, no. It's telling us
And
it's
you're
time
done.
to go.
In person with a hybrid with a virtual
Yes,
option.
no, I got it now. And I see that the lights are like doing just as well as I am right now.
Okay. So is there
Yeah, see
any, we really do need to go, but is there any
you can push the
burning
button, you
issue
see the little
that
white
we
panel?
need to hear about? Any good of the order? Anybody have anything for good of the order that can't wait?
EIT,
Oh,
yeah.
Point in time count.
point in time count on Friday through next Wednesday.
Okay. And
That's all I gotta say.
Is there an ask or?
Nope, I'm just letting everyone know, this is the big thing for
Right.
all counties at this time of year across the United States to engage in the point in time count.
If you're on Facebook, the Facebook account for the point in time count is I Count Thurston. And it has all of the events and the schedules up on there.
Great, thank
Michael has
you.
his hand up too.
Michael,
Yeah, this will be really quick, but for good of the order, it's our turn on the 3-year rotation for community development block grant. And we had a work session to discuss that the other day. It says, we could choose economic priorities or housing or whatever. We decided as a council unanimously to focus on 80% of those funds pretty much all of the capital dollars to focus on housing for low income folks. So we'll do the RFP in the spring, and that process will begin, and we'll be working with the county on administering that. But that's the order to share, I think. So we're focusing the vast majority of CDBG on housing stuff.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, if not, we're done. I'm gonna die. Woo. I was really having my doubts about that. I was really having my doubts about that.
I know, right? Especially with my short circuiting at the end.